Hey guys, this is Matt. Welcome back to the channel, and today is a day that I've been waiting for a long time, and I am trying to get the Datsun into the garage. Now that doesn't mean I'm not going to be working on the RX-7. It just means right now, while quarantine's happening and everything else, I actually have a lot of parts for the Datsun, and I need to get the Datsun up and running because it has literally been sitting here for 19 months and it's been driving me nuts. So the first thing I need to do is get this cover off, put some air in some of the tires, and we've got some storms rolling in, so I need to try to hurry up. But I'm gonna see if by myself I can just roll this down into my driveway so that I can go ahead and get it up on the lift. So I'll go ahead and get the tarp off and get some air in these tires, and I'll check in just a second. So that ended up being a total disaster. It just was not going to budge on its own. So I really did not want to start the car up because I didn't want to push any nasty fuel. But so this nice wasted gas, it doesn't smell bad. And of course I've got to drain the tank. So I've got some work ahead of me to get this cleaned up. Thought the battery was charged, but it apparently wasn't. So I used a booster pack and a few clicks, and it turned right over. Unfortunately, I was not able to film that. I do need to get this mess cleaned up, and then I need to go ahead and see how much fuel is left in the tank. The fuel gauge doesn't really read like there's a whole lot, but I don't know if that fuel gauge works or not. So I think my first thing is to see how much we've got and get that all drained out. Let's see how much is actually left in here. And it doesn't smell too bad, so I'm hopeful that this is actually a clean gas tank. For some reason, I was really worried about this being rusty. A lot of the gas that came out from the fuel pump was orange, and of course I know the fuel pump's completely shot, so maybe it was just rust from the fuel pump, but this gas actually already looks like it's clear. So fingers crossed, we are not having to buy a new tank, which is good because I was not wanting to waiting on parts or getting this one cleaned up. So hopefully there's less than 5 gallons in here. So I end up getting maybe a little over a gallon of gas, and it's got a little bit of a tinge to it, but it's not horrible. So I think what I'm actually going to do is I'm not going to worry about pulling the gas tank out right now. I will put an extra filter in line with the fuel line so that if there is a problem, I can catch it. It's probably more important right now to see about getting this car running without spitting fuel everywhere. I don't have a fuel leak in any lines. I don't have a fuel leak at the tank. I just have a fuel leak somehow coming out of the fuel pump. It doesn't look like it's coming out of any of the hoses. I just think that maybe the body of the fuel pump is somehow corroded and rotted out. I have disconnected the battery, so I don't have to worry about power, but you could certainly disconnect the pump from the hatch area. And it looks like you could just pull the entire plate off back here that has looks like it has like 4 12 millimeter nuts that you could pull off, and this whole assembly would come out. But I think what I'm going to do is go ahead and disconnect the power lines and get all these extra fuel lines off. This is an electronic fuel injection, so there is potential that there is some fuel pressure still in the lines, which I have let the car sit here for a bit, and considering that there's a hole in the pump, I probably don't have any extra fuel pressure, but I will be careful when I'm disconnecting those. So let me go grab some tools and we'll start disconnecting some of these bolts and get these lines disconnected. I don't know if you saw that, but that clamp wasn't even tight. It was probably tight when it was installed, but it just compressed the rubber over time, and doing that, it just didn't stay tight. But that wasn't where the source of my leak was, because my leak is coming from on this side of the fuel pump. The hose on this side is really stuck on, and I'm debating on if it's even probably going to be able to come off. I may go ahead and take some of these fuel lines off and replace them, just because it would be quick and easy to do that. And if I have to go ahead and cut this off, then I'm probably gonna have to replace that anyway. This isn't the first time somebody's replaced this fuel pump on this car. So let me try to pry this line off and we'll go ahead and get those screws out. I definitely don't recommend this way, but I'm already here, so that's what I'm doing. But basically I'm carefully taking the hose off, and as I'm taking the hose off, it's relieving the pressure. It's probably also a lot of fuel just draining back in the line, so I'll probably just give it a few minutes just to drain out. So I'll go ahead and turn the camera off, get my mess cleaned up, and I'll check back in a minute. All right, so after draining all that fuel out, which there wasn't a whole lot, it was a few paper towels worth, I did go ahead and pry the line. So this pump is sitting up in there like this, and so I just pry the hose off that's there. That other side is just going to be a little bit tough to get off. Let me see. So difficult to tell what exactly was the problem. I suspect there's somewhere in here there's a bad seal, possibly around where the connectors go in. So I'm gonna go take this and compare it to the new fuel pump I've got, make sure it's the right part, and I'm gonna go ahead and go see what fuel lines I've got. There's a little internal screen right here. I will pull that out and see how much debris is inside that. Again, just another check to see if there's anything wrong in the fuel tank. But yeah, so I'll go get the other fuel pump and I'll check in just a second. I've decided that I wanna go ahead and just replace some of these fuel lines before we go ahead and do anything else. For me, it's going to be easiest just to take the whole fuel pump kind of bracket off the car, because there are two small pieces of hose, one there and one over there, and I can just replace those off the car easier. Plus it'll give me a chance to clean this up a little bit, and then I'll go ahead and replace the feed line that comes from the gas tank, which just kind of routes up. It actually goes through the frame up there and then comes back down and into the back of the fuel tank, and then there's the section of return line as well that I'll replace. I need to go ahead and take those off, and I'll take this bracket off as well. And if you guys happen to hear any kind of like radio static, I have no idea what's going on. I can't hear anything, but apparently my microphone is picking up some radio static, so bear with me on that. I'll figure it out and try to get that corrected. You know, all this looks like corrosion and rust and looks really nasty, and there might be a little bit of rust like up here on the rear diff. But for the most part, this is just rubber coating that is like really dirty, and it's just all over the entire bottom of these Datsun. So that'll be a fun project one day, getting all that off, but I think it did its job, and it's actually protected a lot of the metal. It doesn't look pretty, but we'll get that cleaned off eventually. So I need to go grab a socket, and there's 4 bolts, one in each corner of that plate, and I'll go ahead and pop that off. For parts on this project, if all you're doing is replacing the fuel pump, then that's basically all you're going to need. Now, you may want to consider replacing some of the clamps and some of the little pieces of hose around the fuel pump and some other things, just depending on what condition you're in. But if that's all you're after, that's really all you need. For me, I'm going to go ahead and kind of do a refresh of the entire fuel system. So I'm going to go ahead and replace the fuel filter, which I've got a OEM fuel filter, and I'm going to install a new inline fuel filter that'll kind of be before the fuel pump to catch anything that's coming out of the gas tank. And this will be a little bit easier to replace, like on a regular, you know, once a year, every 12,000 miles, something like that, and I can keep an eye on what's going on. So I will have the 2 filters to install. I am going to go ahead and replace all my clamps that I take off, and so I would recommend getting fuel injection clamps that are stainless steel that are matched to the hosing that you're going to be using. They'll just clamp better and they'll last longer. The 280Z does have fuel injection, so you definitely want to make sure that you're taking into consideration the fact that you will have higher pressure fuel system. There are some lines that aren't as high pressure, like the return lines, things like that, where you could probably use the worm gear type. But for me, I'm just going to use all these EFI clamps that are stainless steel. And then I am going to replace a lot of the hose that I've got in various parts and bits and pieces of the car. So anything coming out of the gas tank, anything going to and from the pump, anything going to and from the fuel rail in the engine bay, and there's a good chance that they're old and brittle. I don't want to develop any leaks or have any really big problems down the road. For the most part, the pressurized side is, I'm going to use 5/16 inch fuel line, and I've got a couple strips here, and I've got cutoffs from other projects. And then for the low pressure side of the pump, I'm going to use 7/16. That isn't necessarily a common fuel line diameter, but the factory fuel line, I think is 10 millimeter. So you're kind of in between 3/8 of an inch and 1/2 inch. You could probably get either of those to work. maybe err on the side of caution and go with the 3/8 inch so that you can make sure that you get a nice tight seal. But I do have 7/16 inch, and I'll be using this to replace anything going from the gas tank to the fuel pump. And the last thing I'll mention, which is kind of optional, depends on what condition yours is in, but the way that the fuel pump is clamped into the car, it has a little rubber kind of isolator that goes between the metal clamp that goes over top the fuel pump. And I know mine's already corroded, but chances are, just from the age of the cars, they're not in great shape. So you can source replacement parts for that, but I'm just gonna go ahead and use a bicycle tire. There isn't really any fuel that should be coming in contact with that rubber. You know, if it is, it's just accidental. But I'll just cut a strip of bicycle tire and loop it around here before I clamp it into the car. So that's just kind of a cheaper, easier way for me to do it. That's all the parts for the project that I'm going to be doing today. There are a few more fuel lines that need to be replaced, but that's kind of a job that you would probably be easier to do when the gas tank is coming out of the car. And considering I'm not doing that right now, I'll just take inventory of what I've got, and the next time I go to do that, I will replace those few lines. And those are kind of like some of the breather lines and things that go up to the top of the fuel tank that really aren't accessible or easily accessible without taking the whole tank off. So I got the feed line off, which you just kind of have to push it back through the frame. With all that undercoating and just crap that's built up on it, it does take a little bit of time. And then I've got the return line off, pretty easy. If you're doing this to be completely thorough and you know this is going to be the future for your restoration, you know, the fuel damper is probably something you want to go ahead and replace. They are hard to find. I think there are some aftermarket options out there for like $60 to $80. I'm assuming mine works because I've driven the car and it's been fine, so I'm just not going to mess with it right now. When I do my engine swap, you know, probably the whole fuel system will be replaced anyway. So this is just my attempt to get the car up and running and make sure that it's reliable, at least in the short term. I'm not going to mess with this too much, but there are a couple of lines here that I want to go ahead and replace. These older lines are a little bit of a challenge to get off because they're so cruddy. All three of these are the same size. And then potentially this little piece right here is the same size, and then it transitions up here to the 5/16 inch hose. But I may be able to get away with using 5/16 here, 5/16 here, and then try 7/16 for the rest of it. And then this is the rubber, I guess, cushion that goes between the fuel pump and this metal bracket, and where mine was exposed to fuel and just old, it has for the most part fallen apart. I will be putting an inline fuel filter on the feed line. So for me, I picked up a Fram G3, and this is a 3/8 inch fuel filter. And this is 7/16 inch line, so there is a little bit of a fitment issue, but I don't think they make any 7/16 inch fuel filters. You could step this up to a 1/2 inch potentially, if you could find a metal one. But for now, I wanted to run a clear one so that I could kind of see if I am getting any debris or crud out of the gas tanks. Probably just put it kind of here between the gas tank, because that seems like a good spot. It'll be kind of out of the way. So I think what I'm gonna do is get this disassembled and go ahead and try to figure out all these hoses and get them replaced. I have all the hoses replaced, and basically it ended up being 5/16 for everything related to the fuel pump. And then I pre-cut my 7/16 inch line for the feed, but I still have to get that fuel filter installed, and once I got this kind of roughed out in the car, I'll decide the best place to do that. And then I'm actually going to use 5/16 line for the return section. It looks like it's 7/16, but the barbs on the tank and the fuel lines are 5/16. So I'll have a little section of that, and I'll trim it to the exact length once I've got it mocked up in the car. I did do a little cleaning on the hardware. I'm not doing full restoration right now. I'm just trying to get the car running, so none of this looks as pretty as it could. I went ahead and mocked up the new fuel pump just to kind of see how that would fit, make sure everything was in alignment. And of course, it's got to scooch over a little bit, but until I plug it in, it's not going to do that. I'll go ahead and pop this off, and then I'll just put the bracket in the car without the fuel pump. So I need to go ahead and get this feed line routed, and yeah, let's get back under the car. Off camera, I went ahead and cleaned all the barbs and added just the lightest amount of grease around all the hard lines for the fuel system so that the new hoses can slide on a little bit easier. I think I go ahead and feed this onto the hard line that goes up to the front of the car, and then get this guy bolted on. I've been struggling for the last couple minutes to get that 7/16 inch fuel line through the frame, and I think it's just because the 7/16 inch line is just a hair bigger than the OEM line, and no matter how hard I push, I could get it almost all the way through, but then the hose would just start buckling, and I think it's just getting really tight in the grommet. And you can pull this grommet out, and mine's in really good condition, so if you just push this out through towards the rear of the car, it'll just pop right out. So with it out of the car, it's still a struggle, but I can put a little bit of silicone or WD-40 on this and slide it over the hose. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide this onto the hose and then grease this and push this back through the frame. I feel like that combination is going to be a little bit easier to push back through the frame than trying to get this back through. It's hard to film because I need to be in the same spot the camera is, so I'll check in when I've got it installed. I've got all the clamps tightened up. I've got the fuel pump secured. Got the electrical connections back. I've got the feed line on and tightened up. And I basically was able to run it back through all the factory connectors. So everything down here looks tight and ready to go. So the last thing I need to do is work on the fuel filter and the return line. I want to go ahead and get this inline fuel filter installed. So part of the reason why I'm doing this is so that I can swap it out regularly and check on it and see if I'm picking up any debris from the gas tank. So I don't want to put it in a place that's overly difficult to get to. So I think if this is wrapped, somewhere in here, having it basically kind of in the middle, somewhere in this area, or maybe even a little bit higher, will be easy enough to change and swap out when I need to. When this is full, it'll be a little bit heavier than the line, so I also don't want it to cause like a huge sag in the line, which could pinch the line. So I'll probably put it about right here. So I'll need to measure all this out, cut the line, and then get this installed. And it does have arrows indicating the flow direction, so make sure you pay attention and you're going from the gas tank to the fuel pump. So that's where I ended up putting the fuel filter, and it is just plastic. So once I'm pretty sure there's no more debris or there's nothing in the gas tank I need to be too worried about, I'll probably switch this out for a metal one, just because you can't really, I don't want to cinch these lines down too tight in fear of cracking the plastic. That is a 3/8 inch barb going into a 7/16 inch hose, which I was able to get it plenty tight, but it isn't exactly the right size. So I'll have to keep my eye on that. But like I said, I'll probably be swapping this filter out when I do oil changes and things like that. Went ahead and got my 5/16 inch return line added. So everything down here is done. You know, got the whole fuel pump assembly and everything. You know, nothing's in a bind. Everything, you know, there's a little bit of wiggle room on everything, so that's good. And I would say the hardest thing with this whole process was probably feeding the 7/16 inch line through the frame. Again, you could just leave that grommet out if you want to wrap the hose in some other way to protect it, but I did get some grease on there and I was able to push it through after a little bit of fiddling with it. Everything down here is buttoned up, but before I start the car, I want to go ahead and replace the fuel filter as well. I'll go ahead and get this thing back down on the ground because the fuel filter's up in the engine bay. On the Datsun, it's fairly easy to get to the fuel filter. It's just right up here on the right-hand side. My hoses don't look bad, but of course they used worm gear style clamps and cinched them down really tight. So they probably have cracked or, you know, severely compressed the rubber. And I've got enough cutoffs left that I can go ahead and replace that. But, and then there's another one that goes from the bottom of the fuel filter down to the hard line that runs to the back. This doesn't look that old, so hopefully somebody was doing regular maintenance on this thing. It is loose. It's smaller than the clamp, which I've heard that newer fuel filters are a little bit smaller, but I can do the same trick that I did with the fuel pump and put a little piece of bicycle tire kind of around that to cinch that up. But this is really kind of my first really looking at the engine bay. I mean, after I got the car, I just looked at it briefly before I put it into storage. I'm gonna have to do, looks like a valve cover, maybe even a head gasket, a little bit of oil running down the side. There's probably some hoses that need to be replaced just because they're old, and I have noticed a little bit of coolant on the ground. This car does not have a lot of rust, which, you know, a lot of the common places, which there's a little bit down there near the battery box, but, you know, there's a little bit on the fenders and a little bit on the frame, but, you know, this car is really clean, all things considered. I mean, it needs to be cleaned, but there's just not a lot of rust. I did notice that the overflow tank for the coolant system is well beyond the max line, so I don't know if that means there's some air in the system or if somebody overfilled it. I probably have drained most of the fuel out of the system, but I will be careful when I disconnect all this stuff and catch any fuel that happens to drip out. I did go ahead and take off the bracket that holds the fuel filter because the hardware was really rusty, so I just swapped out the screws so that I could tighten it up better. And then I've got the 5/16 inch fuel lines on the new fuel filter. You know, obviously pay attention to the flow direction. I need to go ahead and fish the bottom back onto the line that runs back to the back of the car. And then I cut some more rubber bicycle tire to wrap around this when it goes into the fuel filter. So pretty self-explanatory. We'll go ahead and get it installed. I've got everything buttoned up with the fuel filter. The return line doesn't look too bad, so I'm not going to replace it. And I'll just keep that in mind next time I'm getting some fuel line that I need about looks like an 18 inch or so long piece. And I've gone ahead and hooked up the battery and gone back over all the connections. I don't think this is going to kick right over, even though I've checked the battery and the battery says it's been charged. I did have to get a booster pack on it the last time. So let me go grab the keys and we'll see if she starts. All right, so I just added about 2 gallons of gas with a little bit of stabilizer in it. So let's see if she'll turn over. I don't think she will without that booster pack, but it's worth a shot. So I'm gonna give it a second to see if that, make sure that fuel pump is getting some fuel up to the front of the engine. So I'm just looking to make sure I don't see any leaks with anything. not going to let it run too long because I need to get through the rest of the fluid changes on the car. But actually that battery, I think maybe before I just didn't have the terminals tightened down good enough. So yeah, I mean, I'll obviously need to keep my eye on it for a little bit just to make sure that we don't have any significant fuel leaks. But so far I'm not seeing anything, which is good. All right, this was a project that really should have just taken about an hour, but I did end up having to do it over a couple days just because I needed to get some more clamps and some fuel line, just because I ran a little short, and I had actually had to go through two fuel filters because the first one that I got sent was too small for the system, so I had to get a second one. But it's all good now. It's up and running. I'm gonna keep my eye on it, but I really can't do a whole lot of driving with it right now. It just has way too many problems to be on the road, and we'll be working on that. But one of the things I've got coming up soon is I've got some guys coming out to work on my garage door to get me more clearance. So I don't want to have this thing out of commission too much, because then it'll be a pain trying to drag this back out in the driveway when they come to do that. So they're going to come and do that here in a couple weeks. So I'll probably go ahead and off camera do fluid changes and check on some of the things I've noticed that are leaking and start trying to get some gaskets and seals, that kind of good stuff. Nothing too exciting. And then once I get the garage door all squared away, then I can go deeper into things like the brake system and the weather seals and trim and all the stuff that I've got for this. So obviously one of the first things I want to do is get these big bumpers off. That may take having the gas tank pulled out anyway. So it may be that's a time we can do another inspection on the gas system. I really just kind of feel my way with this car because I don't want to, I'm just trying to get it up and running right now. I'm not really trying to do a full restoration on it. I'm not trying to do a crazy build on it right now. Right now, I just want to get it on the road, drive it kind of in its current condition, see what things we need to be improved on. And then I'm in the process of potentially sourcing a motor. So there's lots of things going on, but I'm really not 100% sure what I'm gonna be doing just yet. Having suggestions about what to do with the Datsun or RX-7 or anything else, just let me know. I appreciate every single one of you that sit and watch these videos to the end and give me comments and feedback. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, leave them down below, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.